In 2015, AGCO, one of the largest agricultural equipment manufacturers in the world, made a decision that looked absurd from a commercial standpoint. They took a tractor designed in the 1950s and officially relaunched it on the East African market. Not an improved version, not a design inspired by it. The actual tractor, with the same engineering principles, the same philosophy of simplicity that had been built into it 70 years earlier. They called it the People's Tractor. That tells you everything you need to know about what the Massey Ferguson 35 is. And today I'm going to tell you the story of a machine that agricultural historians call one of the most important in the history of humanity. Not the history of technology, the history of humanity. Because this tractor changed how people eat, how they work, how entire countries moved from hunger to relative food security. I'll tell you where it came from, why its birth nearly fell apart because of a clash between two stubborn men, what made it unbeatable in markets from Britain to Brazil and from India to Africa, and at the end, why in 2026 this tractor is still working in the fields. Watch to the end. This isn't a story about iron, it's a story about an idea. To understand what the MF35 is, you have to understand who Harry Ferguson was, because without him, this machine wouldn't exist in any form. Harry Ferguson was an Irishman from County Down, born in 1884 into a poor farming family. A man with a personality so difficult that no one could work with him for long, but with a mind so sharp that his ideas reshaped entire industries. He was the first person in Ireland to build and fly his own airplane. In 1909, when the Wright brothers were still figuring out how flight worked. Then he turned his attention to tractors and made a revolution there no less significant. Ferguson's greatest invention was the three-point hitch with hydraulic draft control, a system he developed in the 1930s that today sits on every tractor in the world, literally everyone. Any modern tractor, John Deere, Case, Class, New Holland, uses the three-point hitch. It's such a fundamental element of the tractor that most people never stop to think someone invented it, that someone was Harry Ferguson. The concept is simple to understand, but brilliant in execution. Before Ferguson, implements, plows, cultivators, harrows, were attached to tractors rigidly or through simple mechanical hitches. When a plow hit a hard rock or root, all that force went backward into the tractor, which could rear up and flip over. Farmers were being killed by their own tractors. It was a genuine, widespread problem. Ferguson designed a hydraulic system that automatically adjusted tillage depth and compensated for soil resistance, redirecting the force not backward but downward, into the ground. The tractor pressed into the earth instead of rearing up. It was safer, more efficient, and produced significantly better tillage quality. Ferguson patented the system, built his own tractor operation, and then struck the famous handshake agreement with Henry Ford. Literally a contract with no paper, sealed only by the handshake of two men. Ford manufactured tractors using Ferguson's system. Ferguson sold them through his dealer network. It was one of the strangest business alliances in industrial history, and it worked as long as Henry Ford was alive. After Ford's death in 1947, his grandson Henry Ford II terminated the agreement unilaterally without warning, simply by mailing a notice. Ferguson sued and ultimately received $9.25 million in compensation. Enormous money for the time. But something mattered far more than the money. The break with Ford forced Ferguson to build his own manufacturing operation in Britain. In 1946, he reached an agreement with Standard Motor Company to produce at a factory in Coventry, and that's where the Ferguson TE20 was born in 1946. Gray, small, with a distinctive rounded hood. TE stood for Tractor England. 20 horsepower, simple, inexpensive, incredibly reliable. Over 10 years of production from 1946 to 1956, more than 500,000 TE20s were built. 500,000 machines in an era when most farms in Britain, Ireland, and Europe were still working with horses. The TE20 was the tractor that literally mechanized post-war European agriculture. In Ireland, it earned the nickname Little Grey Fergie, Not an official name, but a folk nickname that stuck permanently. To this day, when someone in Ireland says the Fergie, every farmer over 40 knows exactly what they mean. But the story we're telling today is about the next generation. A tractor that took everything great about the TE20, added significantly more power, improved hydraulics, and a design for a new era. A tractor that was supposed to carry on a great tradition, but nearly vanished before it was born. In 1953, engineer Herman Klemm, working at Ferguson's American division in Detroit, began developing a new model, the TO35, the successor to the TO30, which was itself the American version of the TE20. Klemm wrote to Harry Ferguson, no longer young, no longer directly involved at the factory, but still watching everything happening with his creation, with a letter describing the new project. Ferguson replied with one word, no. He was unhappy with the direction of development and ordered the project stopped. Klemm didn't give up. He wrote a second letter, 23 pages long, 23 pages of detailed technical justifications, market analysis, explanations of every design decision. This document is one of the most unusual in the history of tractor engineering. An engineer wrote what was essentially a thesis to convince the company's founder not to kill his own project. Ferguson read it and changed his decision. That was the beginning of the tractor that launched in the U.S. as the Ferguson TO35 in January 1955, a year ahead of schedule after a March 1954 conference in San Antonio decided to accelerate the rollout. And in Britain, at the Banner Lane factory in Coventry, the Ferguson FE35 was introduced on October 1, 1956, the successor to the legendary TE20. The first production unit, serial number 1001, rolled off the line on August 27th of that year. If the TE20 was the gray tractor of a new era, the FE35 was its older, more powerful, better-looking brother. It looked completely different on the outside. A new hood design with fixed panels and removable covers instead of the full one-piece tilt, a new dashboard, a new grille, and most importantly, a two-tone color scheme that immediately became its signature. Gray body and wheels, and a bronze-gold finish on the mechanical engine and transmission components. The official name was bronze, but farmers called it gold from day one. The tractor instantly earned the nickname Gold Belly. This mattered beyond aesthetics. Harry Ferguson had insisted his entire life that tractors should be gray. No ornamentation, no color accents, just functional working machines. But by 1956, Ferguson had already left the company as a result of the 1953 merger with Canadian firm Massey Harris. He had effectively lost control of the business, receiving money but surrendering power. The new management decided the company needed a fresh image. The gold belly was a symbol that the Harry Ferguson era had ended and the Massey Ferguson era had begun. Technically, the FE35 was a significant step forward. The engine received a new cylinder head designed by the legendary Sir Harry Ricardo, one of the greatest engine engineers of his time. The diesel version, with a four-cylinder Standard Motor Company engine displacing 2.5 liters, produced 37 horsepower, a six-speed gearbox. An improved hydraulic system with 5 control functions: transport mode, draft control, position control, response rate, external hydraulics, all operated by 2 levers to the right of the driver. Historians would later call it the Ferguson system on steroids, the same principles taken to a significantly higher level. However, the FE35 had a serious flaw that wasn't widely discussed at the time, but did real damage to the diesel version's reputation. The 23C diesel engine started poorly in cold weather. The problem was a single glow plug in the manifold instead of individual plugs for each cylinder, a decision that saved money in manufacturing but cost farmers plenty of frustration on cold winter mornings. Competitor Alice Chalmers, using the same 23C engine in their ED40, solved this by fitting individual plugs, and their tractor started without issue. Massey Ferguson lost meaningful sales precisely because of this. The Gold Belly lived in its original form for just over a year. In December 1957, company management announced a complete rebrand. All machines would sell under the single Massey Ferguson name. The FE35 became the MF35. The gold and gray paint scheme was replaced by red and gray, the colors that would become the brand's visual identity for the next several decades. And it was in red and gray that the MF35 began its march toward world dominance. In 1959, the company acquired Perkins Engines, a British diesel engine manufacturer whose three-cylinder diesel was significantly better than the troubled 23C. The Perkins, a 3.152, also displacing 2.5 liters, became the engine that turned the MF35 into the ideal machine. Reliable, fuel-efficient, cold-weather-friendly, simple to service. Farmers who had complained about the finicky diesel now got exactly what they wanted. On November 8, 1962, the MF35X arrived, the final and most refined version. Power increased again. The headline feature was the multi-power system, a hydraulic transmission that allowed changing the gear ratio on the move without depressing the clutch. In essence, this was an early version of what we now call power shift, a feature found on every modern tractor today, but in 1962 it was frontier technology. A farmer could smoothly slow down on a tough stretch and speed up on a lighter one, without stopping the machine, without touching the clutch, just moving a lever. The MF35X was the direct predecessor of the legendary Massey Ferguson 135, the tractor that replaced it in production in 1964 and itself became one of the best-selling tractors in history. The lineage running from the TE20 through the FE35 and MF35 to the MF135 is one of the most consistent engineering stories in the history of agricultural machinery. Over 8 years of production, from 1956 to 1964, the Banner Lane factory in Coventry alone built 388,382 units of the MF35. That number is impressive on its own, but it doesn't tell the full story, because Banner Lane was just one factory, one country. The MF35 was built under license around the world, and the timeline of those productions is its own story, one that shows just how revolutionary this tractor was. India. In 1960, TAFE, Tractors and Farm Equipment Limited, purchased a license to manufacture the MF35. They began production in Chennai, and they built it until 2002, 42 years of continuous production of a single model. In a country where most farming operations worked small plots on tight budgets, the MF35 was the perfect solution, powerful enough for real work, simple enough to maintain, with accessible parts. Today, Massey Ferguson is one of the largest tractor brands in India, and the roots of that dominance go straight back to the licensing agreement of 1960. Yugoslavia. IMT, Industry of Machinery and Tractors, also purchased a license and produced its own version of the MF35 under the names IMT 533 and IMT 539. This was one of the rare cases of a socialist country with centralized state planning buying a Western technology for its farmers. And that says everything about how pragmatically sound the choice of this design was. Pakistan, Turkey, Iran. In each of these countries, versions or direct descendants of the MF35 were built at various points in time. The Banner Lane factory in Coventry supplied assembly kits and components to foreign manufacturers right up to December 24, 2002, a date local workers remembered precisely because it was the last day of a factory that had by then produced a total of 3,307,996 tractors and assembly kits in its history. 3,307,000. One factory, one model, family. At the height of its power in the 1960s and 70s, Massey Ferguson controlled roughly a quarter of the global tractor market. In Britain, 40% of the market. In Australia, 35%. In Latin America, the largest manufacturer, 18,000 dealer locations worldwide. This wasn't just a company, it was a global infrastructure for the mechanization of agriculture. But why did the MF35 become such a legend when dozens of other tractors from the same era didn't? Competitors were making reliable, powerful machines too. The Ford 8N, the International Harvester Farmall H, the John Deere Model M, all were solid tractors. What made the MF35 different? The answer is several things that came together in one machine at exactly the right moment. First, the Ferguson system heritage. The three-point hitch with hydraulic draft control was licensed to Massey Ferguson, and on the MF35 it worked better than on any other tractor of the time. This was a revolution in tillage. Plowing depth held automatically, engine load distributed optimally, soil worked evenly. Farmers who switched to the MF35 from other tractors felt the difference immediately. Second, repairability. The MF35 was engineered so that any village mechanic in India or Africa could fix it. Engine access was straightforward. The design was logical. Components were standardized. In an era when service centers in developing countries were scarce and parts took months to arrive, a machine you could repair with hand tools wasn't just convenient, it was indispensable. This is exactly what made the MF35 a de facto standard across Africa, Asia, and Latin America. Third, affordability. The MF35 cost $2,529 in the US in 1963, real money, but significantly less than many competitors with comparable capabilities. Massey Ferguson deliberately kept prices accessible, part of a strategy inherited directly from Harry Ferguson, who believed a tractor should be within reach of an ordinary farmer, not just wealthy operations. Fourth, versatility. The MF35 could plow, plant, harvest, work with a loader, mow, bale hay. It came in versions for arable land, for orchards and vineyards, for industrial use, agricultural, industrial, lawn, and turf, 3 core variants, plus countless regional modifications. One tractor could do work that previously required a whole stable of horses and several specialized machines. In 2014, when this story seemed like a completed chapter of history, something unexpected happened. A GCO, which now owns the Massey Ferguson brand, conducted a large-scale market study of sub-Saharan Africa. The question was simple: what does a farmer in Kenya, Tanzania, or Ethiopia actually need? Someone farming 5 to 10 acres with no service center within 100 miles and a limited budget? The answer was unexpected. They needed the MF35. Not a modern equivalent with electronic controls, not a tractor with GPS and climate control, but the exact philosophy Harry Ferguson embedded in the TE20 in 1946 and engineers developed into the MF35 in 1956. Simplicity, reliability, repairability, affordability. That understanding is what drove the creation of the People's Tractor, the tractor AGCO, launched in Africa as a direct descendant of the MF35's ideas. This isn't a marketing move or nostalgia, it's an acknowledgement that an idea born 70 years ago is still relevant today. But the most remarkable thing isn't the African relaunch. The most remarkable thing happens every day around the world, and you can see it for yourself if you know where to look. Original MF35s built half a century ago are still working, not standing in museums behind glass with "Do Not Touch" placards, working. In Ireland, there are farm operations where a gray and gold FE35 from 1957 is the primary machine for light work because it costs less to keep running than to buy and maintain a modern tractor. In India, you can still find tractors assembled at the TAFE factory in the 1970s. They're alive, they're working, they get repaired by local mechanics. In Africa, the MF35 and its direct descendants are the most common tractor in some regions, precisely because they can be fixed without specialized equipment, and parts can be found at local shops. At auctions around the world today, a well-preserved or restored MF35 sells for $8,000 to $15,000. This isn't a collector's rarity. It's a working machine with an active market. New spare parts are being manufactured right now. An entire industry that exists because roughly 500,000 original tractors are scattered across the globe and need servicing. There are companies in Britain, Ireland, India, and Pakistan that make their entire living producing parts for a machine that went out of production 60 years ago. That's something extraordinary from a business perspective, and entirely logical given how correctly this tractor was made. Harry Ferguson died in 1960, 4 years after his FE35 rolled off the line in Coventry. He didn't live to see his machine feed India. He never saw the MF35 mechanize African villages. He never learned that the tractor he nearly killed with a single word, no, would become one of the most important tools in the history of world agricultural civilization. But he knew one thing for certain. Back in the 1930s, as he was still developing his hitch system, Ferguson said something that's often quoted: "We can mechanize agriculture across the entire world, if we do it right." He wasn't just talking about technology, he was talking about accessibility, simplicity, reliability, a tractor that any person with hands and a head can fix anywhere on the planet without specialized training and without expensive service equipment. That's exactly what the MF35 became. Not because it was the most powerful, not because it was the most technologically advanced, but because it was made right, with an understanding of who it was being built for and what that person actually needed. We live in an era when tractors cost $500,000 and won't start without dealer authorization, when software matters more than mechanics, when manufacturers deliberately complicate their machines to lock customers into their ecosystem. Against that backdrop, the story of the MF35 sounds almost like a parable. A tractor with no computers, no proprietary software, no sensors that block startup, just metal and engine, hydraulics, and a system that Harry Ferguson invented so that an ordinary person could work the land effectively and safely. This tractor fed entire nations. It's still working in fields today. And 70 years later, manufacturers are returning to its principles, trying to answer the question, what should a tractor be for those who need it most? The answer hasn't changed since 1956. Simple, reliable, built right.